Hello and welcome to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. My name is Brian Perez. It is Friday, the 24th of June, and we have a very special edition of the program today. Pastor Brian Broderson from Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa is joining me in the studio, along with another fella, the best-dressed guy in the studio, if you're watching on Facebook and YouTube right now. That is Brad Dacus, the attorney from the Pacific Justice Institute. Brad, it is great to have you here in the studio on a momentous day like today, let's just say.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's definitely a momentous day, and it's great to be in the studio here to talk about it and why we at Pacific Justice Institute are so excited about it moving forward.
Yeah.
You know, Brad, I mean, for many people, many people are in shock because they never believed that this day would come. It just seemed like this ruling from 1973, 50 years ago, was kind of set in stone and irrevocable, and this is just the way it will always be. And yet, like Brian said, a momentous day in that the infamous Roe versus Wade decision has been overturned. What do you think? I mean, that's kind of mind-boggling.
Well, it is mind-boggling in a way, but it's also not as unusual as people might think when they look at other times in history when the court went divergent from the Constitution, the principles of the Constitution, the laws of nature and nature's gods. You know, for example, Plessy versus Ferguson. You know, where you can have separate but equal. You know, on the face of it, that was contrary to the amendments, the 14th Amendment, and yet they came down with something like that. It took decades. You know, Brown versus Board of Education before that was, changed, and then of course you had the Dred Scott decision upholding slavery and reconciling that in that regard. And we as a people, we were told that, but we knew in our conscience and we knew in the premise of the Constitution that this was not right. It violated, once again, the laws of nature and nature's God. Well, in the same way, Roe versus Wade was a blatant violation of the Constitution. The Constitution in no way was intended to not protect the preborn or to allow the federal government to prevent the states from having legislation defining murder, preventing murder with regards to the preborn. And of course, it clearly violated the laws of nature and nature's God, natural law. So, in a way, it's surprising, but it's something that so many have been working so diligently on because we knew from the beginning that this was a bad precedent. And even some from the left who were actually for abortion rights said, you know what, this decision, the way it was put together and rationalized, it really doesn't make sense. It's a very weak decision.
Yeah. So what do you say to the person who is sort of looking at this from let's just say the left side, looking on and thinking that this is all a religious conspiracy? This is driven by crazy fundamentalist Christians. The court has just succumbed to that kind of pressure. Is this a religious decision that the court has passed?
Oh, absolutely not. It's definitely not a religious decision. It's a decision premised upon the Constitution and the interpretation of the Constitution. Roe versus Wade. Basically, what they said was, "Golly gee, we don't know when life begins." So we're just going to say it doesn't until the baby's born effectively and women can have an abortion. And they did the trimesters. They arbitrarily did 3 months, 3 months, 3 months. Then later on the court said, well, in the Casey case, they said, well, if a baby can survive outside the mother's womb, then that's okay. You can protect that baby. But even Sandra Day O'Connor in that decision, she said, there's a little problem here because we're basically premising the right to life and personhood on the medical technology of a day. So if a baby's conceived in 1940, and their viability point is much later. Oh, too bad, they're not a person. But if you happen to be born in the year 2000, well, then you're a person, because technology allows you to survive outside the mother's womb at an earlier state. It made absolutely no sense. Once again, a clear violation of the laws of nature and nature's God, presupposing something based on the medical technology of the day. So Casey was a very weak decision as well. And in the past, people don't understand, states have been defining personhood. They have defined what is murder. So you go to one state, they have different rules. Say, this is personhood, this is murder, this... that's how the states work. That's their job. And then with Roe versus Wade, they said, yeah, you can define personhood, except when it comes to a woman wanting to abort her baby, then it's not. Like, for example, in states across the country, if a third party decides he sees a woman's pregnant and says, what, you're pregnant? I'm going to slam you in the stomach with my fist. I'm going to cause you to miscarry. I'm going to kill that unborn baby. States could prosecute that person for murder. Mm-hmm. And states have those statutes all over the place for murder. How is it logical, and it's not, to say that is a person that you can be prosecuted for killing, for murdering, if you're this person, but it's not a person, it's just a blob of cells if you're the mother or the doctor. It's illogical, and this had to come to an end, and it had to be brought back to the states.
Yeah. I mean, that makes zero sense. I mean, and the thing I was thinking about when we were talking earlier is how these two kinds of things coexisted for a long time, right?
Yes, decades. Right. Decades they coexisted. And, I remember in law school, it made no sense. I had a professor who was dealing with property law, and he said, at the point of conception, that's a person entitled to full inheritance rights. So even if the father doesn't know that they've conceived, he dies, there's two kids, and this is the third one. Even though he's not mentioned in the will, he's conceived, he's considered a person for inheritance rights.
Wow.
And I raised my hand, as I often did, and I said, professors, I want to make sure I've got this right. So you're saying when it comes to property rights, there's full personhood at the point of conception, but right now with Roe versus Wade, there's that person is not entitled to the more fundamental, basic right to life. Professor, how does this reconcile? And he looked at me, he says, I know where you're going, and we're not going to go there. And he said, next case.
Wow.
They knew it.
Yeah.
They themselves knew it.
Crazy.
We're so blessed to have a guy like this on our side. It's Brad Dacus from the Pacific Justice Institute. We're talking about a bunch of things that the Supreme Court has done in the last few days, but we're starting the program by talking about the overturning of Roe versus Wade earlier today, June 24th. Mm-hmm. And it's just one of those days that we'll probably mark for years on end. Oh, yeah. The 1-year anniversary, the 2-year anniversary.
Yeah. Well, a couple of weeks ago, Brad and I were sitting down having a chat about a number of things, and the discussion came up about the leaked brief, and I asked him what he thought, and he said, "Oh, it's a done deal." He said, "There's right. no going back on it," and
not after it was leaked.
It was
after leaked. Yeah. The justice had no choice but to stand by their decision.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they would be succumbing to mobs and who knows what, and they can't let that be established as a precedent.
Yeah, but and I mean I knew obviously this was in the air, but honestly this morning I got up and I was just scrolling through Twitter, and suddenly, boom, Roe versus Wade has been overturned. I was like, oh my gosh, it happened, and it happened today. So, Brad, what about the Dobbs case? Because they kind of are going hand in hand, or sort of being reported hand in hand. So what's the connection? What does that mean?
Yes.
Does that affect what the Roe versus Wade overturning did? Yes. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the Dobbs case is about a Mississippi law that banned abortions except when a woman's life is in danger after 15 weeks of development of the preborn. That clearly was in violation of Roe versus Wade, because in the Casey decision, which said viability outside the mother's womb, that's at 20 weeks for the most part, how the courts have recognized. So they said 15, that violates that. And so the Supreme Court, along with Roberts, said, yeah, so 6-3, they upheld the Mississippi statute and says, yeah, that's reasonable. Now, 5 of those 6 said, well, it's just a blatant. I mean, Roe versus Wade is unconstitutional. It needs to be just flat out overturned. This should be going back to the states. The Supreme Court has no business playing, legislators. That's not our job. Roberts, who upheld the Mississippi statute, says, I just can't go quite that far as to overturn Roe versus Wade. I think that it's really more of a principle of, does the woman have at least an ample opportunity to be able to have an abortion? And so that's how he sort of split the baby, if you will, because, he says Mississippi's fine, but maybe there's some other laws that just go too far. And he was just going to sort of kick the can down the road. But the others said, no, we need to deal with this once and for all. And the other 5, I have total respect for all 5 of them. They were very bold and really respectful of the Constitution.
And very courageous at this stage in history, right?
Oh, yeah. You had 2 of the justices with mobs, screaming at them, yelling at them, their kids trying to sleep at night and hearing these people yelling at saying bad things about their dad and on a regular basis because the Biden administration refused to do his job in the Department of Justice to enforce the federal law which protects judges from this kind of mob and harassment and threats that were coming out. And so they were very bold. They had to deal with a lot of harassment. Their kids had to deal with harassment. Their wives had to deal with harassment, or their husband with Amy Coney Barrett.
Did they ever get the security that they needed?
No. They're just some policemen right outside their house, a few police officers, but no one actually enforcing the federal statute to protect judges. Yeah. And the reason people understand is because judges are not to be influenced by the masses. Legislators are. That's their job. They're legislators. Judges are to be blind and neutral, looking at the law, looking at the Constitution, not influenced by people screaming and yelling at them from the street. Yeah. And that's why that federal law was passed and why it's constitutional.
Yeah. So this is a little bit off the topic, but so you mentioned Chief Justice Roberts and where he went on this, and so he, in a sense, he's to some degree saying that Roe versus Wade is constitutional, or at least he's not willing to come out and flat out say it's unconstitutional. But if I remember correctly, with the Obergefell decision, he wrote that was an unconstitutional decision, or that you could search high and low in the Constitution and you're never going to find anything in it that's going to support this decision.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah. So exactly. So Roberts is interesting. So he's very unpredictable. Mm-hmm. I sort of call him the 14-year-old on the bench. Mm-hmm. You're just you're not really sure what his feelings are, where he's going to come out. Before he was Chief Justice, he seemed to be a fairly reliable conservative in terms of what does the law say, what does the Constitution say, what was it intended to say. I mean, that was pretty much it. But as Chief Justice, he's been much more easily swayed, political, and influenced, and that's most unfortunate. His predecessor, Justice Rehnquist, was a true justice who looked at the law, looked at the Constitution, was not swayed, and I wish we had Rehnquist on as Chief Justice again. But I'm very happy with the court that we have. And I'm very grateful to the former president for those 3 key strategic appointments. Yeah. But for those appointments, we'd be, like I say, having a totally different conversation today.
Yeah. So in the last couple months, there's been a number of things that have come down, a number of decisions that are good decisions from the standpoint of a conservative person who recognizes that, sure, we've got problems in our country and, we've not always abided by the Constitution or lived according to the way we profess that we ought to as Christians. Right. But regardless of that, there are certain things that you look at and you go, okay, man, thank you for that. And religious liberty is one of them.
Oh, yes.
And a lot of people, I think a lot of people don't realize that religious liberty is the step behind religious liberty is that affects everybody is freedom of conscience.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I mean, it's just a short step from taking away religious liberty to taking away freedom of conscience. And then it's basically just if you disagree with anything that we say, then you're in trouble.
Yeah, we at Pacific Justice Institute right now have a number of cases defending conscience teachers, law enforcement officers, security guards being fired because of what they said 10 years ago about in a Bible study online. I mean, it is outrageous, the purging taking place because of people and their conscience losing their jobs because of their conscience, because of their faith. We even have right now a very dramatic case we announced earlier this morning on behalf of many people who are effectively on death row because of their faith here in the United States, and specifically they're in need of organ donations. There's 97% of 92% of hospitals don't look at whether or not they've been vaccinated with for COVID. They just say, hey, you're the number one qualifier. You need it the most. You get the organ. But there's a small minority of hospitals that say, no, if you're not vaccinated, you will not get the organ. We don't care if it kills you.
Wow.
We don't care. And it's a real ugly abuse of discretion, of control. It's evil. And so these people are literally on effectively a death row because they will not compromise their convictions. They feel convicted by the Lord not to have those vaccines, and so we've stepped in and we're representing them of some very bold litigation to keep them from dying. It's about 100 people who will be losing their lives over the coming months. Wow. If we're not successful in defending their ability to be as the most qualified to be able to receive an organ donation.
Yeah, wow. So touch on the recent decisions that really directly affected religious liberty.
Yes, there's one that comes out of Maine, and we're so happy about this case. It's dealing with a community which said, "Look, we don't have a place for a high school, for kids to go to." So our policy is we're going to let parents choose whatever private school they want their kids to go to. No problem. Here's like a voucher. Oh, but by the way, it can't be one of those religious schools, those Christian schools that use the Bible. Can't be that. Cannot be that. But any other schools, yeah, that's fine. So the court took it up. Supreme Court took it up. Lower court says, yeah, that's fine. They can discriminate against Christian schools, and the Supreme Court. They came down and they made it really clear. They said no. In a 6-3 decision, they said you cannot do that. The government has to be neutral. It can't engage in state hostility and discrimination and bigotry against an institution when it comes to services simply because they're religious. What it does is it opens the door now for all states to confidently pass legislation allowing for vouchers or tax credits, something like that, to allow parents to have their children go to a Christian school and not to have their children in public schools, which is so timely because public schools, as you know,
are imploding.
They're imploding, and they've become spiritual death camps. Yeah. And that's strong language, but that's the best term I could come up with: spiritual death camps. When it comes to children, I think it's going to become very, very difficult for a child under the curriculum, for example, in California schools, to go from kindergarten through high school and come out and still be a strong Christian, even with a biblical Christian family background. That's why private Christian schools are so important. Homeschooling is important. And that's why we even started church homeschool co-ops to empower churches who can't afford a private school to actually work with parents and start these kind of co-ops. Mm-hmm. And those are taken off across the country as well, which is exciting.
So with this Maine law, and that's effective across all 50 states?
Effectively, as a precedent, yes.
Okay, yeah. So,
yes.
But our wonderful state of California might decide, well, we don't like that, so we're going to try to do, that's a possibility.
Yeah, California, I don't see doing this in the near future until the people decide to change its government or adopt a proposition or initiative that could bring this about. It's been tried twice. Many are sort of throwing up their hands saying we've tried this twice, but I think it's only a matter of time before Californians say enough is enough. Mm-hmm. These are my kids. I do not want you indoctrinating them. Many of them actually are leaving the state altogether.
Yeah. And I wonder how many people are just utterly ignorant of what's going on. People that just, maybe they're lower income families. Maybe they're overwhelmed with just trying to make a living.
Right.
They're not really paying a whole lot of attention to what's going on in the classroom, knowing what their kids are hearing. I would think there's probably a fair number of people in this.
They don't know that drag queen story hour is
No,
happening.
they don't. I
No,
mean,
they don't.
Yeah.
Well, we have a video we produced. It was a major project. It's called Sex Ed, Let Parents Decide. It's called SEXXX Ed, Let Parents Decide. And people can download that for free on our website, pji.org. It's explicit material from the curriculum used all the way down to the kindergarten level. It is shocking. And we already see school districts outside of California copying this radical LGBTQ curriculum. Fort Worth School District in Texas, Fort Worth, they've adopted this program. Austin, Texas adopted it. They then backtracked and said no after a lot of screaming parents. But this is happening. It's spreading. People need to understand that the spiritual survival of their children is on the line. And when they see this film, it becomes very apparent of what we're dealing with. And the polls, unfortunately, show that the other side is being very effective in brainwashing our children. And I think it's contributing to the large number of the Z generation, even some millennials, who for the first time ever, as matter of precedent, are saying, you know what, I really don't believe anything anymore.
Yeah.
So we're seeing that in a very dramatic way. And I think that's public schools, government schools are a contributing factor, especially with regard to the garbage they're putting out.
Yeah. Boy, unbelievable. Crazy stuff. Well,
It is.
Man, thank you for what you do.
Well, it's my pleasure. And then, of course, the Second Amendment.
Yes. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that was another major decision for people who appreciate the original intent of the Constitution.
Yeah.
State of New York or the city of New York said, you know what, we're not going to. You can bear arms. You can have a gun in your home, but you can't bear arms outside your home. Now, the Constitution protects our right to bear arms. It doesn't say only inside your home. So a lawsuit was filed to challenge this. Make a long story short, the Supreme Court said just that. The Constitution says people have a right to bear arms, unqualified with regards to where they are in their home or outside their home. Obviously, private businesses can have whatever rules they want for people who come into their place of business. The government has a compelling state interest to prevent maybe ex-felons or people who are mentally unstable from being able to get a license to have a gun or a concealed weapon. But the Supreme Court basically just solidified protection for people to be able to just protect themselves with a concealed weapon. States impacted are all blue states. There's about 7 of them, including California, New York and others that have passed these laws. They're going to be directly impacted. We even have dealt with churches who are told in California, you cannot have any weapons in your church. So if someone comes in to blow and shoot your people, you can't have a weapon. We've had to deal with that. Well, now that's taken care of, and this is going to be a part of the program that we have at PJI already to help and empower churches on how they can have security, how they can protect their church, pro-life centers, how they can protect themselves against violence and the like. So this is going to be very contributory to helping to fight crime, if you will, by empowering people to be an inherent deterrent.
Yeah. Now, you know what some people are saying is that, this decision basically just supported what happened in Texas, what happened in Buffalo. This just, more gun rights in the minds of some people are just going to lead to more of this kind of violence that we're seeing in classrooms and in supermarkets and in churches and so forth. How do you respond to that?
Well, when I'm in a Walmart in San Jose, I'm much more likely to look to my left and right just to, I don't feel safe. When I'm in a Walmart in Grapevine, Texas, I feel very safe. Very safe, because I know there's probably at least a dozen people in the aisles with concealed weapons. And if someone comes in and starts shooting, it's going to be taken care of pretty quickly. I mean, I don't want to sound, cold on this, but what we found is that where people have the right to bear arms, there's lower crime. Those cities that have the highest crime, those cities that have severe restrictions on the ability for people to bear arms, are the ones that have the highest murder and death rates. So we do need to have...
Because the criminals are the ones with the arms.
Oh, and they can get them. You know why? Because they don't care about the law. They're criminals, so they get to, so that's the reality of what we're dealing with. Obviously, legislation that protects against people with criminal records, requiring background checks, those kinds of provisions are very reasonable. They don't inhibit our ability to protect and defend ourselves as individuals. But the murder rates is going up dramatically in these cities. We've seen the mobs, the riots. I think Americans now more than ever understand the need to be able to at least have some ability to protect themselves, because we can't always count on law enforcement, not in today's day and age.
Yeah, and some people, I think they sort of present it as the idea that just suddenly everybody's going to strap on a gun and be walking around town, and if you
like the Old West,
if you get them upset, they got the gun right there. They're just going to pull it out and shoot you.
Well, and there's a lot of people who should not have a gun.
Yeah.
And I it's just, I'll leave it at that. And we need to be very careful. And people, if they have any propensity in any way to be reactive or compulsive in that regard, definitely shouldn't have a gun, because if they do shoot, they could spend the rest of their life behind bars, or even in some states get the death penalty. I think it's still going to be revered and looked at very seriously. And I think, in states that do allow for it, the majority of the states, overall majority of states that allow people to have concealed weapons, they don't have those problems. And like I say, there's fewer, break-ins and mobs in Walmarts in Texas than there are here in California, and there's a reason, I believe.
Yeah. So what about this argument? Look, when the Constitution was written, they basically gave you permission to own a musket. But now we've got these high-powered, military-grade AR-15s and AK-47s, and surely the Constitution was not at all thinking that. So if you want to get a musket, fine. That's what the Constitution was about. But this other stuff, no way. The Constitution does not, the Second Amendment does not refer to this kind of stuff that we're talking about.
Well,
today.
it doesn't, because they didn't have those weapons back then. But it's interesting to note the Second Amendment at no time limited the type of weapon, even for that time, number one. Number two, people say, well, you don't need a AR-15, whatever, to go hunting. That wasn't the purpose of the Second Amendment.
Right, exactly.
It's to be able to protect and defend ourselves. Now, it's up to legislatures to decide, what is reasonable opportunity for people to protect and defend themselves versus not. And that's an issue up for debate for our legislators to deal with. But that is a question. What is allowing for reasonable defense of themselves, of their families, versus beyond that, which invades the welfare and safety security of society. And that is a question up for debate, and I think the Constitution allows for that debate to happen.
And the Constitution intentionally put within that the right to protect yourself against an oppressive government.
Absolutely. Right? In fact, that was the core reason why it's the Second Amendment right after the First, because they weren't sure that our government was going to work. There's nothing but corruption and monarchs at that time. This was a great experiment. In fact, the founding fathers said it's, but for a moral people, do we have any chance for this to work? That they did want there to be a final resolution. If it doesn't work, then the people need to have the ability to take back their government again. And the only way that can happen is if they have the ability to bear arms. That is paramount. And people say, well, it really doesn't apply today. Well, there's many of us who've seen our freedoms and liberties challenged enough that that is probably an important thing to keep in our Constitution.
Yeah, and if you know a little bit of history, you know that that's not far from any society.
Correct. Only one generation away.
And for people who don't know their history, what are some good resources? Because to a lot of people listening, this might be new to them.
Oh, yes.
They may not realize that, the part about the oppressive government and all that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We've got to take a break right now on Pastor's Perspective. Brian Perez here with our special guest, along with Brian Broderson, Brad Dacus from the Pacific Justice Institute. We're here to talk about the Supreme Court and the decisions that they've been handing down over the last few weeks. Not taking phone calls today, maybe second half, but probably not. pji.org is how you can find out about Brad's organization. Back in a couple of minutes. Hang on. We're back on Pastor's Perspective. Brian Perez here, along with Pastor Brian Broderson from Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California. We are going to open up the lines at 888-564-6173. Attorney Brad Dacus could not stay with us for the second half of the program, but you can find out more about him at pji.org. His organization is the Pacific Justice Institute, pji.org. His program, called The Dacus Report, is heard on many of these same radio stations, including our flagship station, K-Wave, Saturday mornings at 10:30, and our sister station, KSDW, Saturday afternoons at 12:30. You can get the K-Wave app downloaded to your phone or tablet, and then that way you can listen to it. But right before the break, I mentioned history and how some people... We're so the news cycle and everything. A lot of people just base their knowledge based on what they see on their favorite news channel. So a lot of the things that Brad was mentioning, that you were mentioning, might be new to people. They may not realize why some of these laws were passed.
And of course, I think there are certain people that it's in their best interest to not either to intentionally conceal that stuff or. Perhaps they don't even know themselves, but that, and I'm glad Brad said that, that there is a reason why it's a Second Amendment, and ultimately it was to protect yourself against a potential oppressive government. Because remember, everybody came here, the Pilgrims certainly came here and fled oppressive regimes in Europe. That's part of what drove them to come. So they didn't want to see that repeated here. Thomas Kidd is a historian out of Baylor, and he has written numerous books on American history, written textbooks, that would just kind of take you on a journey of the actual history of the country, but also written great books. His most recent book is on Thomas Jefferson, and that book has just come out. I think he's written on Benjamin Franklin, the founders, and I like Thomas Kidd. I feel like he's very, I think he's very he's very balanced and very truthful. He is an evangelical, but he doesn't view American history through what sometimes happens with Christians. They just view it through a Christian lens, and they fail to look at the inconsistencies in the lives of many of the founders and so forth. And he does, I think, a fair job of giving you, like, this is the reality, okay? In some cases, let's not say these guys were actual Christians,
Right.
because they weren't Christians in the biblical sense. They were people who believed in the moralistic perspectives of Scripture and wanted to somehow incorporate that into society. But like Thomas Jefferson, for example, he didn't believe in the virgin birth. He didn't believe in the bodily resurrection of Christ. He basically didn't believe in miracles.
Mm-hmm.
And so for that reason, he created his own version of the Bible, the Thomas Jefferson Bible, where he extracted the supernatural from it, emphasized mostly the ethical elements of it, and used that for his own personal devotion. He never made it public. It was never like, hey, get my Bible, but he used it himself because he thought all the supernatural stuff is just a distraction. That's all myth anyway. I want to concentrate on these things that Jesus said that pertain more to ethics and morals and things like that.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that about Thomas Jefferson. And yeah, I can tell by Thomas Kidd's subtitle to his book on Thomas Jefferson, A Biography of Spirit and Flesh.
Yeah.
That right there tells you that he's going to tell you both sides of Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, and so Thomas Jefferson is the one who famously writes that all men are created equal. And therefore, the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, is the prerogative of all people.
Yeah.
But he simultaneously was a slave owner and, had sexual relations with one of his slaves and produced children from one of his slaves. So, and Thomas Kidd is good about not whitewashing any of that. This is the contradiction. Thus, like you said, the subtitle. This is where it seemed like this guy's really in the Spirit, and this is where, he's obviously not in the Spirit here.
Which reminds me of a guy that we had in office not too long ago that a lot of people have a problem with because they say he is the most immoral person we've ever had. But yet the fact that these, like the Supreme Court decision today on overturning Roe v. Wade was partially because of him installing conservative justices onto the court. Yeah.
And, with human beings, you have a mixed bag.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, even sometimes with Christians, you have Christian leaders, you have a mixed bag, which, there's less excuse for that than obviously just for, the general public or, a figure like a political figure. But yeah, anyway, Thomas Kidd did a history of the United States. I think it's a 2-volume history of the United States, which that's it, American history right there.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, 2 volumes. And I would highly recommend that.
All right, so this guy's name is Thomas Kidd, Kidd. You can find his stuff on Amazon and probably just about anywhere. But check that out and get some good resources there. This is Pastor's Perspective. We have decided to open the line, so give us a call, whatever's on your mind, 888-564-6173. 888-564-6173 is the number to call. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you can see the number there on the bottom of your screen. Call us, 888-564-6173. We'll get to you as soon as we can before the program ends in about 20 minutes.
So I want to address something. After I saw this earth-shaking decision that came down today, as I was sitting thinking about it, I decided to just write a little bit on it. So I wrote a tweet, and let me just read.
You tweeted a tweet.
Yes, and I wrote this. Jesus said, "Murders proceed from the heart." I'm thankful that in the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the state-approved murder of the innocent has been halted. Now that the law has changed, let's continue to pray for hearts to change.
Yeah.
And what I want to bring up, though, is somebody reached out to me and talked about the fact that they felt that the murder reference was a little bit harsh. And I listened, and I think that, let's I think I would put it into perspective like this. I think that basically 63 million unborn children killed in the womb, I think qualifies as murder. In some cases, first-degree murder, in that the person understood, knew, this is a human being that I am going to rid myself of because I don't want the responsibility of taking care of this human being. It's going to mess with my career, going to interfere with my life, or whatever the case. But also, obviously, there are many people that would have had abortions who didn't understand it in those terms. They didn't understand, because there was a debate for a long time about, just exactly what is being aborted. That's where we get the term fetus. Fetus was a convenient way to avoid the possibility that it's actually a baby. So, and I think there were plenty of people that probably just thought, well,
it's not a person.
It's not a person, And so I wouldn't say that in that case you would have the exact same definition of what was going on. Maybe this would be like manslaughter. Manslaughter is unintentional, right? You kill somebody, you didn't really intend to kill them. So maybe it's something like that. But the biggest concern of the person that I was talking to, a person that I really, really love and respect, was that there are inevitably women out there who, for whatever reason, have had an abortion, and to sort of label them as murderers does not help them through whatever emotional crisis or aftermath.
Yeah.
And, in the end, I agreed. I thought, I agree with that. And I've never, I don't speak that way from the pulpit. I've certainly, and I went on to say to the person, look, I've been in ministry 40 years. You know how many hundreds of women I've counseled that have actually had abortions? And I've never once said, oh, you're a murderer, you committed murder.
Right.
That is not the way to navigate those kinds of things. So I just wanted to clarify that for anybody who might have read that. I mean, I know some of you thought, it's about time Brian spoke out about this stuff, Some people are mad that they think that I actually voted for Biden because he was pro-abortion, and who knows how people get twisted ideas like that. But I at the same time, I don't want to, give the impression that abortion is an unpardonable sin. And there are many women who have lived probably with decades of regret for having aborted. And maybe some that didn't even know at the time what was actually happening, who came to understand later what did happen, and then deeply regretted that. And I don't want any of them to think that they are beyond God's mercy, grace, forgiveness. Move on, a clean slate as you confess to the Lord. That's all taken care of.
And for men listening too, because we've heard stories of men who didn't want their wives or girlfriends to get an abortion, but they did anyway, or same thing where decades later, a man becomes a Christian and then he realizes, oh my goodness, I did something wrong.
Yeah, I think those are things that we do, especially when you come to faith. You do go through a process. Initially, you're a sinner, but I think throughout the rest of your life, you come to realize you're a much bigger sinner than you ever thought you were. And you might have these developing understandings that you look back and go, wow, I can't believe that I was responsible for that.
Right.
I encourage that.
Yeah.
I'm culpable with that. And yet, thank God, again, there's His grace and mercy and forgiveness. So.
Yeah. 888-564-6173 is our telephone number today on Pastor's Perspective. If you want to talk about this issue or something else entirely, we've got about 15 minutes left, 12 minutes left, something like that. So give us a call, 888-564-6173. Brian Perez here with Brian Broderson, the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. I saw a post or something on Facebook today where a Christian reminded other Christians, okay, let's not gloat over this necessarily. I mean, this is great, but let's not, because this is going to further divide the nation. It's going to, I guess what I want to ask is, what should be the church's stance? I mean, our stance stays the same, but it shouldn't be like we won.
Yeah.
Where do we draw the line?
Well, I mean, we need to maintain a posture of humility and grace and thankfulness. I mean, we're thankful that however this rolls out across the country, and like Brad said, now basically all the Supreme Court did was say there's no place in the Constitution for the decision that was made on Roe versus Wade. So we're going to overturn that because it never should have been placed as law anyway. Mm-hmm. And what should have happened is the states should have been the ones to decide on their policies regarding abortion. So that's essentially what's happened. So it's gone from a federal government issue to now becoming a state-by-state issue. And as Brad also said, of course, it's going to vary from state to state. Some states are conservative, and some states have already been enacting laws, that were pro-life. And then there are other states, like the one we live in, that, of course, our governor is committed, publicly committed to making this a haven for those seeking abortion.
Yeah.
And so it's going to come back down to the state. So, but what I have seen, read, heard a number of people say that our work is still ahead of us as Christians.
Yeah.
And we need to think more in terms of how do we care for women who are pregnant and don't necessarily want to be pregnant, but also realize that they don't want to do anything. They don't want to cross a state line to go get an abortion or something like that. And I think in a lot of ways, the church is always getting beat up on and piled on. And of course, sometimes there's valid reasons for that in certain segments of the church. But, by and large, just simple people who love Jesus and care for others have been working in these areas for decades. The crisis pregnancy centers that don't offer abortion as an alternative, but offer adoption as an alternative, and come alongside of a young lady and walk her through her pregnancy and assist her with counseling and with the various things that they need. So Christians have been doing that. I think we just probably need to do it more.
Yeah.
And I think we will. We'll step up. We've been involved here with a ministry called Saving the Storks, and we've had them out a number of times, and that's exactly what they do. They have their medical van. They would pull up at places. They have their it's a thing where you put it on the tummy and you can see ultrasound. Yes, they have their ultrasound machine, and then they would go in, and a pregnant girl would come in. She'd see the baby through the ultrasound. She'd, oh my gosh, I want to keep my baby, and okay, well we want to help you do that, and a pregnancy center just locally. We've done a number of things with them. And so I would imagine that we'll probably want to beef that up even a little bit. And I would encourage other churches, pastors, leaders to think creatively, to pray for how can we help. Because the point in the tweet that I sent out was the point wasn't murder. I wasn't trying to emphasize that part of it. I do in the end think that is what we're dealing with. But my point was the heart. The heart needs to change.
Yeah.
So you can change the law, but the law, it affects people who abide by the law and plenty of people that will just ignore the law and not care about it or be angry over it. So how do we make a lasting change? That's got to happen on the heart level. So that's where we pray that God will change people's hearts. I know that I was probably, before I was a Christian, I was probably pro-choice. I don't think I ever really thought too much about it back in those days. But if you would have pressed me on it and I've thought about it, I probably would have said, yeah, fine, whatever. All of that changes when Jesus comes into your life because he changes your heart. And subsequently, that changes your mind.
Yeah.
And he brings you into conformity to the way he thinks and the way he's called us to live. So,
yeah, so with all these crisis pregnancy centers and Save the Storks and, so we are thankful that this was overturned, but yet there's still people that need our help. It's like, so now that that young lady's not going to get an abortion, okay, now let's help her. Let's come alongside her. Let's help her with diapers and baby formula and all this stuff that she might need.
Absolutely, yeah. Yep. So Ed Stetzer and our listeners, some of our listeners would know Ed because he has a program here on Saturday morning. He does the Stetzer Leadership Podcast, which is a great podcast that I listen to frequently. And just today, he is doing an interview, or did an interview, with a woman named Karen Swallow Pryor. Karen is a English professor many, many years at Liberty University, now at Midwestern Baptist or something. But she's been a pro-life advocate for decades. And she's very thoughtful. Anyway, their conversation on the Stetzer Leadership Podcast is really excellent. And they're talking about these same kind of things. So I would recommend people who listen to podcasts to maybe download that and listen to that today or over the next few days. And I think that'll give you some good sense of how to move forward now in regard to the heart issues and things.
Yeah, what's the podcast name again?
Stetzer Leadership Podcast.
Stetzer Leadership Podcast. Check that out. All right, 888-564-6173. Let's see how many of these calls we can get through before the program ends in a few minutes. Steve in California, how can we help you?
Yes, I just had a question. I found myself crying like about a year ago. Abortion, as far as the woman thing, of course, the girl, the baby, and it's so bondage to them. But as a guy, I thought about after like the late 60s.
Hold on, Steve, your phone is cutting out or something. It's not a very clear signal. Are you on speakerphone? Maybe you can come off of speakerphone so that we could hear you a little clearer.
Yeah, I'll try. I have a...
That sounds a little better. Go ahead.
Okay. And so I was found myself like crying a couple of times going, okay, and I understand heaven, but absent from the body, present with the Lord. I had two girlfriends early in the early 70s, late 60s that had abortions, and I was, the old hippie junk after Vietnam, all that junk. And so I found myself crying. I thought just kind of, and I know it's not quite doctrinally right, but so in heaven, someone tapped me on the shoulder, hi, Dad. I robbed them of their life down here. I'm not saying you'll think of them, but I just thought of a realm for a guy.
Are you okay, Steve?
Yeah, it's just a real reality. I robbed them of their life on earth. And I know there's no condemnation, but there's no consequences. And so for a guy, your girlfriend's having an abortion, it's like not a big deal maybe before you get married and you're after high school a little bit. But the reality is that baby, it was a child and absent from the body, present of the Lord. And I robbed them of their life on earth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, Steve, you're right. I mean, that is a reality that has happened, and but thank God that you're forgiven and reconciled to Jesus, and thank God that child, went to be with the Lord. I do think that children who are aborted, they are automatically brought into the presence of Jesus. I mean, we don't know the details of that, but that's just my thinking on it. So, but I get it, and I get the emotion, and I understand that, and I think that's perfectly, predictable for a sensitive person and for a person who, again, from a Christian perspective, realizes, wow, this is what I did, but God is in the business of healing and reconciling. And won't it be a day when somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, hi, Dad?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, Brian, that is called the Stetzer Church Leaders Podcast.
Oh, got it. Okay.
His old podcast was Stetzer Leadership. So he keeps changing podcasts. So
all
Ed,
right.
get your act together.
Yes, please do. I want to ask a similar question. You mentioned the tweet that you posted, and it's about changing the hearts of people. Another thing that people have been talking about lately, and over COVID, we saw an increase in the use of chemical abortions. So now it's going to be the kind of thing to where, yeah, abortion may be illegal now in Texas, but you can maybe buy the pills online on, I don't know if Amazon or whatever, but get them from California, and the same thing happens all over.
And I mean, this is, I think the victory is that you no longer have a federally sort of sponsored is maybe not the exact right word, but you no longer have the federal government stating that there is a constitutional right to an abortion. I think that's the big victory right there, because I think that's just that's problematic in a multitude of ways. But like we said already, the battle is going to come down to each individual heart, and you're not going to stop somebody who wants to get an abortion. They're just going to go where they can get one. Yeah. And the fear it's going to turn into a back alley thing and all of that. I think those are quite often very exaggerated. They're just used as rhetoric, to try to support the position. But, what are you going to do? Yeah. I mean, the morning after pill or whatever, if somebody lives in Texas and ends up getting it, I don't think anybody's going to go out and arrest them for it, but, Yeah. But it's got to be a change of heart.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we've only got about a minute left on the program, so won't take any more calls. But next week is the Calvary Chapel Leaders Conference, the Pastors Conference.
It is, yes. And I forgot to do a video today, so people think maybe they're going to get away with no video from me today, but I'm going to do it still afterwards. It's part of the feature of my video all week long has been my crazy hair. People have been commenting on... They're more interested in my crazy hair than in my announcement about the conference. But hey, if you're a pastor, church leader, and for some strange reason you've not heard yet about the Calvary Chapel Pastors and Leaders Conference, that's happening starting Sunday night, the 26th, and we'll go through Wednesday evening, the 29th. And we'd love to have you join us, participate with us if you're in that kind of a role, and you can get registered at conference.calvarychapel.com, or you can show up on site Monday morning and get registered then.
All right, conference.calvarychapel.com. And speaking of Calvary Chapel Costa Mesa, special guest speaker this Sunday morning at 8:30 and 11. Pastor Brian, who is it? 10 seconds.
It is my friend Ray Ortland.
Yep, going to be a great message. If you have our K-Wave app, you will hear that message the 11 a.m. Pacific time. We're going to carry that one live. Thank you so much for listening to Pastor's Perspective. God bless you guys. See you at church on Sunday. Pastor's Perspective is sponsored by Calvary Chapel Costa Mesa.